Welcome to Africa Update on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. And this week on the program, we will be looking at some quite important and pertinent issues that affect our continent. To stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back again to Africa Update. I'm your host, Chimaka Nwafor. As I said before that short break, we're looking at some pertinent issues that affect our continent. And I'm not alone. I have a guest in the studio with me who's going to further look into this, have this conversation with me, Professor Muktar Imam, who's a professor of international relations. Now, let's look at the first thing. It's the African Union is now looking to and asking the world to resize Africa on the map. Now, if you're very conversant with the conversations and all the talks about it, people keep talking about how the map of the world, Africa, is made to look quite very small compared to what its original size is in reality. Now, the African Union formally endorsed the Correct the Map campaign, which calls for replacing the centuries-old Mercator projection with an equal Earth projection map. The Mercator projection distorts land mass sizes, making Africa look much smaller than it actually is, while making Europe and North America appear larger. Meanwhile, the equal Earth projection preserves relative sizes more accurately, showing Africa's true scale. It actually is about 3 times larger than the US. If you can see that, we're currently showing you now on our screen the equal Earth map. And as you can see, Africa is way bigger, much larger than even Canada and United States and even Mexico joined together. If you can see that, actually, Africa is bigger. Now, when we go to the Mercator projection map, you will see an entirely different, very, very different outlook on how the map is. When that comes up on the screen, we will show you that. Now, on the Mercator projection map, you can see that Greenland you can see Greenland right here now. It's quite a small island. But in the Mercator map, Greenland and Africa are almost the same in size in terms of map. Now, what does this matter? Now, look at that. You can see the Mercator world map. The Greenland, that's Denmark, really, and almost Africa are the same in size. Quite a very huge disparity from what we just saw earlier from the equal Earth projection map, where you see it looks like Canada, United States is much bigger than Africa. Meanwhile, on the former map we just saw just recently, you can see that Africa is actually bigger than Canada, Alaska, United States combined together, and of course way larger than Greenland, that it's supposed to look the same here on the Mercator map. Now, this has been a topic of conversations. People have really been, we need to do something about it. But why does this matter? Perception shift. The AU argues that shrinking Africa on maps reinforces outdated colonial era mindsets about the continent's importance. Educational impact. New maps would be introduced in African school curricula to help students see their continent's real scale and importance. Global influence. The AU will lobby global institutions like the UN, World Bank, IMF to adopt the new projection and reports, presentations, and data visualization. So you can see that this is another Mercator map, projection map, and that you can see in that map, Greenland and Africa almost look in size compared to the equal Earth projection map, where you see the real size of this. Now, let's now look at this. Now, in the Mercator map, Africa looks similar, as you can see in that map, in size to Greenland. Meanwhile, in reality, Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland and 3 times the size of the United States. Now, let me give you a brief understanding of the difference between Mercator and equal Earth projection map. There are 2 different ways to represent the spherical Earth on a flat map, which it's in each with its own strengths and weaknesses. Now, the Mercator projection is famous for preserving local angles and shapes, but it distorts the sizes of areas, especially near the poles. Now, the equal Earth projection, on the other hand, is an equal area projection, meaning it accurately represents the relative sizes of different regions, but it distorts shapes, particularly near the poles and edges. Now, one of the issues why it's used is for the Mercator map. The size of land mass, especially for far from the equator, is significantly exaggerated. As you can see on that map, for example, Greenland, again, appears much larger than it actually is. Now, the Mercator projection results in a rectangular map where lines of latitude and longitude intersect at right angles. Despite its distortions, the Mercator projection remains widely used, particularly for navigation and online maps. So the reason why you see it mostly and widely used, that's being said and claimed, is because it's better for navigation and that. Now, for the Equal Earth map, for example, when you see the Equal Earth map, Greenland appears much smaller than on the Mercator map, and its area is proportionate to its actual size. While the areas are accurate, the shapes of continents and countries are distorted, especially near the poles and edges of the map. The Equal Earth projection is a pseudo-cylindrical projection, meaning it is more curved than the Mercator projection, which is cylindrical. Now, because it preserves the area, the Equal Earth projection provides a more accurate representation of the relative sizes of different regions and their relationships to each other. So, for better navigation, people use the Mercator map. However, for better size, let's speak to the size of this continent. The Equal Earth projection is a lot better. Now, the EU is saying we're done with the Mercator map. We want for the people, our people, to see that we are actually a large continent, way bigger than the Mercator map has been showing to the world. Now, my guests in the studio, let's get to you, Professor. You've heard me reel out all that information. And first, I'm going to ask you, what do you think of this move by the African Union?
It's a move, I think, that is long overdue. Because as far as I can remember, this conversation has been raging for over 3 decades, particularly in the academia. A man called Professor Perret wrote a book. I think the 2nd edition was published in 2015. Inside Africa politics, or inside Africa politics. Another very pronounced author is somebody by the name of Alex Thompson, who wrote a book, Introduction to African Politics. And in these books, you would find that the politics of geography is extensively discussed. The politics around colonialism, and of course the colonial legacy around the shaping of the earth is extensively talked about, and how that has projected Africa as people who tell time by the sun, as people from the dark continent, as people who are small in shape and size, essentially portraying Africa to the rest of the world as second feeder continent, which is not what it is in reality, just as you have reeled out in your projection. So I think it is a move in the right direction. It is something that, it's a conversation that needs to be had. Because the truth of the matter is, I don't know if your questions will come from there, but you see, there are, beyond just the geography of it, beyond just the map on the paper, there are all underpinning issues, political issues, or rather political dimensions. You look at it from a geographical dimension. Geography and security have a very integral nexus. And then, of course, you have the diplomatic angle as well. And much more importantly, is the social psychological issue. Because you have embedded or inculcated in a certain demography of individuals the idea that they are second feeder, and so you place them in that categorization, and you allow them to constantly play catch up. And this is what colonialism, of course, the Berlin Conference in 1884 reinforced this this whole idea, and this is what has plagued the world till today. And that's the reason why, after the world moved from the Roman and Greek civilization into the Pax Britannica, which is essentially the time that Britain ruled the world. This was part of what sort of legitimized the position of Britain, for lack of a better word, to project it as a continent or a country or an empire, if you like, that you probably have heard the term. It's an empire where the sun never sets. Right? The reason why that was so at the time was because, you see, Britain saw itself as the dominant world power, and rightly so, because Britain at the time controlled 2/3 of the world, from Danube to Scotland, from the desert to India, was all under the tutelage of that tiny empire, not as big as Abuja.
Yes, yes.
So you see, it proved, exactly. So it was indeed great, you know. So it projected itself, and it is all as a result of this psyche, this mindset, this social psychological conditioning, you know, to tell the world that, look, we are the world, we control the world.
For an island that produces nothing.
Absolutely, absolutely,
really,
absolutely.
Nothing.
So you see, you have brought the economic angle into the conversation. So you see, there are multiple dimensions, which I don't know if your questions will go along that line, but you know that needs to be looked at, and that's the reason why the AU is saying, look, we need to sit back and have this conversation. Cartographers, whatever they're called, have from time immemorial been involved in the business of trying to design the map of the world because it helps with navigation, etc., etc. But you must also understand that the 14th century cartographers, particularly people like Monster with the U, who was the first person who began to, I think in 1429 or so, began, you know, venturing into the space of developing the world map and so on and so forth. Recall that these were people who actually had some sort of relations with Ferdinand, Christopher Columbus, and so on and so forth. No, now, when Ferdinand sent Columbus, or rather when Isabella, the queen at the time, sent Columbus on the expedition to find her land and so on, these are the people who were, you know, the backbone, the cornerstone of what Christopher Columbus was able to accomplish. And the rest is history with Americas and so on and so forth. And they came and said, we didn't find anybody here. We only found bush Indians and etc. But his son refuted his claim. You know, his son
Columbus's son.
Yes, his son Ferdinand wrote about his father, Christopher Columbus. And in his text, he said, my father never touched the mainland. This is me quoting him. He said, my father never touched the mainland. He only stumbled on the islands and saw people who looked like Indians and called them Indians. He said when the conquistadores went up north into Peru, they found calendar that looked like the old Egyptian calendar. They found story buildings. They found gardens. He said they found all the trappings of civilization. But what did we hear from Christopher?
Well, so it equally tends to buttress the point that civilization started from Africa.
Absolutely.
But somehow we're now the ones who are now third world countries, fourth world countries, and second feeders, as you said.
And also,
some things you've said in this your first answer to my first question, and I would like for us to, you know, go into them a bit more. That might just be the context of our conversation. Now, you said there are different categories to this map: the geographical, the social, psychological. Could you, the political? Could you go in depth in these different categories?
Okay, so essentially maps, like I said, from time immemorial, there have been efforts from the 14th century, essentially. This is what the documentation has, you know, that maps have been developed from that period up till 1880, where we began to find. But the map you just showed is essentially the map from that's a 16th century map that became adopted as a formal mapping of the world to say this is how the world is. And that has been shoved down the throats of generations and generations up till this moment. Now, the political dimension or the political implication of that is that, you see, at the United Nations Security Council and before the United Nations, the League of Nations, where conversations are had at the highest level of decision making, which is the United Nations Security Council table.
Africa doesn't even have a permanent.
So the political implication of having a map that says that you are second feeder, you're the smallest, you're tiny, and so on and so forth. Look, membership of the Security Council, permanent membership, is not just predicated on SDG and MDG. No, there are a lot of politics around it, you know, and that is where the discussion of international distribution of resources is had. That is the question of small versus big country is had. That's the question. And when I talk about small versus big country, we're talking about those who, one, should have access to nuclear armament. Two, because these are the things they talk about. We've seen documentaries where they say, we have found cure to HIV and AIDS. And they say, do you want to give it to Africans? Oh, really? In Congress, there's a debate. And it's people who tell time by the sun. How do you hand something
so till now, people still believe that we tell time by the sun.
10 years ago, I was sitting with Mrs. Mariam Abacha, And a friend of hers, Dr. Ladi, walked into the room, and we're having a conversation around kids and so on, the mentality. Sorry to digress, it's just short. And Ladi told us a story about what happened to her. This was in 2017. Told us a story about what happened to her, I think in Finland or somewhere in Europe. And she's a passionate teacher. And she went to Europe somewhere and said, oh, get me a school to teach. I want to teach particularly kids, 5, 7-year-old, 9-year-old kids. And she got into the school. And then she was telling them about Africa. And she said in Africa, with that passion, of Pan-Africanism, black, we've been there, we love our race. And she started telling these kids about Africa. Look, in Africa, we visit one another's home, we're very homely, we're coming out by default. And the kids in the room, you know how very repulsive some white kids can be? They were, you're a liar. And she said, how do you mean? You don't have homes in Africa, was what they told her.
Yeah, well, now, I wouldn't blame those kids if you see some of the videos, the media.
Yes.
Projects.
Yes.
They keep projecting mud houses.
Right.
They keep projecting the safaris and all that. So of course,
so I'm trying to reinforce that position. So essentially, we have not been able to articulate our tales and tell them properly, and that's the reason why you find that people out there perhaps do not even have an understanding about what we're doing back here. But beyond this, there's arrogance. There's the arrogance of we're better than them. Why do we have to learn about them? And that's the reason why you find that an average Nigerian knows the in and out of American politics far better than an American does. There's the arrogance. That angle also has to be talked about as well.
Yes. So you mentioned something about the psychosocial, and I hate to do this, but there's been a Nigerian born, I want to believe. I'm not so certain if she is, but she's over there in the UK, and she's doing
Let me help you. Her name is Kemi.
Okay. She's doing a very great job of disparaging our beautiful, lovely country, maybe to a certain extent, maybe Africa in her own way. And recently I came across a meme or a tweet or something on where somebody said, if they were to leave Nigeria, they won't be much worse than her. And, so does that pander to the psychosocial part of the conversation?
Absolutely. We have Africans who demean, who derogate, who deface Africa and Africans just to score cheap political goals, just for the clout of it, for to reinforce the mentality of the whites that we are actually people who are second feeder people. It's unfortunate, but I think she's just clout chasing. I really hope and pray that she heals. I think she's also dealing with certain things as well. Perhaps she's coming from a place where there wasn't love.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Let's not psychoanalyze the wonderful British Conservative Party leader. But let's go back to our conversation. Another thing you mentioned earlier was, to look at the smallness and weakness of Africa. Do you think that if we were to do this and venture into it, will it be able to eradicate that mentality, that colonial era mentality of the smallness and weakness of Africa?
It's a place to start. Because, like I said, you see, the thing is, the one thing that is more contagious than a virus is an idea. And an idea one put in someone or a group of people could take a lifetime to take back. So there's a need to start somewhere. Everything is predicated. You see, every society is governed by its triangles: the political, economic, and social dimension. And it is a social that every other pillar lies or stands on. And that's the reason why the Chinese call their revolution the Cultural Revolution. Because it is believed that everything stems from the social. And so if there's a certain mindset that the people have, and that's part of the conversation we need to have in this country, because as much as there is the socio-economic issue, where you talk about income inequality, wealth distribution, and so on and so forth, there's also the social-psychological conditioning problem, which needs to be talked about. And until and unless we fix the social-psychological conditioning problem, no matter what we do, we can invent a government system, it will not work. Until and unless we look at our mindset, our thought process, our values, and the things that we bring to the table. Patriotism is part of that. Discipline is part of that. These are all catalogued around the social psychological conditioning. So yes, I think what the AU is doing is a step in the right direction. It's going to help, if not us, the next generation coming, to understand that this has been distorted. This is a colonial legacy. And the things that we constantly talk about in the classroom and people say, hey, they're ranting and whining and wailing, it's beginning to come to the fore. People are now seeing that, look, all these are just colonial mandates. These things, language of domination, aid in the form of economic support, and now this are all tools in the hands of certain, group of persons and certain clients to continue to dominate the mindset and thought process of other individuals. So yes, I do concur with that, and I think it's the right thing to do.
So again, you mentioned about economic. Let's get to that. Would a more accurate representation of our, continent strengthen the continent's place in trade and climate negotiations? Because when they do this COP, it's going to be COP29, I believe, for this year, and we're the ones who come to the table demanding for. Apparently, we don't produce as much emissions or CO2, but we're the ones suffering
the receiving end
of it. So, will this, if we're to do that, will that actually help us initially trade, as you say, and this climate negotiations as well? Okay.
So essentially, I've been putting these things together for want of time and hitting here and there. But when you look at it, you see, specifically speaking to the economic angle. Beyond just the COP, which is a very critical element as well in this conversation, because ever since the COP started, the conversation has been about reparation. The conversation has been about compensation. The conversation has been about who are the biggest emitters and who are at the receiving end. Those who are at the receiving end naturally should be compensated for the ills that have been brought upon them for no cause of their own, and the discussion is always about, all right, let's engage this very distorted map. I've had this discussion in my class. In the last 10, 15 years, I've been teaching African politics. And this has been my go-to place whenever I want to be melodramatic in the classroom. So, and you will have to forgive me for being melodramatic. I'm an African. So essentially, the economic angle of that, it gives Africa a lot of leverage as far as negotiation is concerned.
Seen as what you call it, the continent that has the most minerals.
Yes, that's where I was going to go to. When you look at this continent essentially houses 60% of the world's arable land. We talk about these things, and at the UN, what do we hear? But you're just you only contribute 20% to the world's. You have 20% of the world's population, yet you only contribute 2% to the world's GDP. This is a lie that I will not tell my 5-year-old daughter. How do you expect us to sit and just fold our arms and accept this number, that we contribute just 2% to the world's GDP, yet this continent houses 40% of the world's rare earth and solid mineral, 40%. And yet, this is what we're told we're contributing to the world. And these are resources that have been carted away from the era of colonialism up till today. And so there's the need to begin to have that conversation. Let's go back to the equator and understand. Let's use the Google Earth map that is essentially good. Well, let's again tell the world that, yeah, we forgive you. Maybe the technology you were using at the time wasn't as sophisticated. And so there's new technology. Let's come to the table and use your technology to understand where the world is and how we can progress from here.
Okay, now I would love to continue this conversation, but time won't allow us, and we have something else that we'll have to do before the program ends. But just lastly, in less than 30 seconds, tell us, will this actually enable us? Because you said it earlier, that seat, global decision making, will this get us there? Maybe not now, maybe in the next 5 years. Will it get us there? If we are able to get the world to see us as that. And I think most importantly for me, I think the question I want you to answer is, how will this foster unity for us as a continent? Because that's more imperative.
You just said something now. If we can get the world to see us, first of all, we need to see ourselves. And this is where the conversation needs to start. And with steps like this, it sort of gives the next generation the impetus, the courage, the whatever it takes to, whatever the word is, to stand tall and talk to their European counterparts as kings meeting kings. It's a mindset issue, like I said, and this is where the conversation is going. So we're hopeful that these actions will help, restore that confidence in Africans to be able to say, look, we need to have that discussion where resources around the United Nations, whether it be positions, whether it be whatever other resources, are shared equitably within the international system. This is a continent of 50+ countries. And here we are, we do not have a seat at the General Assembly, at the Security Council of the United Nations. I don't think that's fair.
Okay, that's the much we can actually take today on the program. We had to equally shelve other conversations because this is quite a very large conversation and we've not even touched it. But thank you so much, Professor Mukhtar Imam, for joining us on the program today. As usual, beautiful insights, educative insights as well. Yeah. You're bringing the classroom to the studios. Thank you so much for joining us. That's the much we have for you on Africa Update this week. For more of our programs, news and documentaries, always follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I've been your host today, Chimaka Nwafor. Same time, same place next week. Bye for now.